Chosen one on pause right here. This moment is not random. It is not another scroll, another voice, another option competing for your attention. This is an interruption. You were told your whole life that you could be anything, that infinite possibilities stretched endlessly before you. That freedom meant keeping every door open, every road available, every version of yourself unfinished. But listen carefully. That story was never meant to empower you. It was meant to delay you. Because when everything is possible, nothing is chosen. And when nothing is chosen, destiny waits. You feel it, don't you? That quiet discomfort when you try to imagine 10 different futures. That strange heaviness when you chase what looks promising but feels hollow. That sense that no matter how many paths you sample something in, you remains untouched. That is not confusion. That is recognition. There are not 100 true journeys for you. There never were. There is one path that responds when you step toward it. One direction that tightens the air around your chest. One assignment that refuses to release you no matter how far you wander. The others, they glitter, they shout, they promise speed, applause, safety, but they do not answer your name. The divine path does not beg for attention. It waits, it watches, and it narrows. Every delay you've experienced was part of that narrowing. Every door that closed without explanation. Every opportunity that looked perfect but dissolved in your hands. You thought you were falling behind. You were being filtered. Because the chosen one is not identified by how many options they have. They are revealed by how few remain. And now you are standing at the edge of that realization, not awakening, remembering. The question is no longer whether you have a path. The question is whether you will stop pretending there are many. That narrowing you felt at the end of the last moment wasn't imagined. When the paths thinned and the noise grew louder, something was being revealed. Because the world you are standing in now was engineered to make commitment feel dangerous. Look around. This era floods you with options by the hour. Careers, identities, platforms, lifestyles, timelines, endless tabs open in your mind, all demanding consideration, none demanding loyalty. They call it freedom, but freedom without direction becomes paralysis. You wake up already behind, not because you are late, but because 10 voices reached you before your own did. Scroll long enough and you'll see 100 lives you could live, each one curated, filtered, optimized to look like the right choice. And slowly, subtly, your inner witness gets drowned out. This is not accidental. A hyper-connected world thrives on your hesitation, because a person who is undecided is easy to redirect. A person who is sampling everything never becomes dangerous to systems built on distraction. You are kept busy evaluating instead of embodying. That constant question in your chest, what if I choose wrong? What if something better appears? What if I miss my moment? That isn't intuition. That's overload. You were not designed to carry 100 unfinished futures. Your nervous system knows it. Your spirit knows it. That's why exhaustion sets in before clarity does. Notice the pattern. The more choices you entertain, the less energy you have. The more directions you consider, the harder it becomes to move at all. You don't feel expanded, you feel fragmented, pulled apart by possibility. And still the pressure whispers, stay flexible, stay open, don't commit too soon, don't limit yourself. But the divine path does not respond to hesitation, it responds to weight. A calling requires mass, attention, presence, a body that is no longer split between 10 imagined selves. This is why everything feels loud right now. The noise increases right before the narrowing completes. The system amplifies options when it senses you are close to choosing. You may have blamed yourself for the overwhelm, thought you lacked discipline, focus, clarity. But hear this clearly, overwhelm is not your weakness. It is the signal that you have reached the threshold where multiplicity stops serving you. The illusion of many paths works only for a season. Eventually it collapses under its own weight. And when it does, what remains is not confusion, but truth. Truth sounds quieter than distraction. It doesn't shout. It repeats. It returns to you in the same questions, the same longings, the same unrest when you ignore it. You are not lost in a maze of options. You are being shown which ones cannot carry you forward. And soon, very soon, the cost of staying undecided will feel heavier than the risk of choosing. That is when the illusion breaks. That collapse you sensed at the end of the last section didn't come from weakness. It came from carrying too much that was never yours to hold. You wondered why your energy began leaking, why motivation faded even when opportunity increased, why the more doors you opened, the more tired you became. This is why every path you step onto asks for fuel: attention, emotion, identity, hope. And when you divide that fuel across 10 directions, nothing ignites. You were told exhaustion meant you needed rest. But rest does not cure misalignment. It only pauses the drain. You've tried this already, taking breaks, resetting routines, changing environments, and still something felt off, because the issue was never effort. It was dispersion. Your spirit was not built to multitask destinies. It was built to channel force. Think about how your body responds when you chase what looks smart versus what feels inevitable. One path requires constant self-convincing. The other pulls you forward even when you resist it. That difference matters. The world rewards visible hustle, not invisible coherence. So you learn to say yes quickly, to keep options warm, to stay relevant, adaptable, available. But every yes that isn't aligned becomes a leak. Subtle at first, then costly. You feel it when progress stalls without explanation, when momentum dies in places that should have worked, when success tastes thin and effort feels heavy. That is not failure. That is your system refusing to power what is not ordained. The divine path carries resistance, yes, but it also carries circulation. Energy returns when given. Strength regenerates as you move. Even hardship feels alive. Misaligned paths drain without replenishing. They consume you to maintain themselves. This is the uncomfortable truth few will say out loud. Not every good opportunity deserves your life force. Not every open door leads forward. Some are exits disguised as entrances. You weren't meant to explore endlessly. You were meant to converge. And convergence requires loss. The loss of alternatives, the loss of imagined versions of yourself, the loss of applause from directions you will no longer face. That's why your energy began withdrawing before your mind understood why. Your deeper intelligence was already choosing. Fatigue was the message. Stagnation was the warning. The slowing down was mercy. Because if you had unlimited energy, you might never stop wandering. But now the question is sharpening. Will you keep feeding paths that cannot sustain you? Or will you allow your strength to gather where it was always meant to flow? The moment you stop chasing everything, something vital will return. Not because life gets easier, but because life becomes aligned, and alignment restores what dispersion steals. That return of energy you sensed at the end of the last moment carries a warning with it. Because the instant your strength begins to gather, resistance appears in a new form. The world does not oppose you with chains. It tempts you with options. You live inside a culture that worships the pivot. Rebrand quickly. Reinvent endlessly. Never stay too long, never be too defined. Never let yourself be narrowed by a single direction. Commitment is framed as naivete. Consistency as stagnation. Depth as missed opportunity. And slowly, without realizing it, you were trained to distrust staying. Staying looks risky when you're taught that relevance expires, that success belongs to those who move fast, shift identities, and keep their exits visible. But the divine path does not unfold through constant adjustment. It unfolds through fidelity. There is a difference between discernment and avoidance, between wisdom and fear dressed as flexibility, between responding to life and refusing to be claimed by it. The path meant for you does not require endless evaluation. It requires consent, and consent feels terrifying when you've been conditioned to believe that committing closes doors forever. But hear this, the doors that matter do not close because you choose. They close because you refuse to. Every delay is also a decision. Every half commitment teaches your life to remain half-formed. You felt it when you hovered at the edge of something meaningful, but kept one foot outside. Progress slowed, joy dulled, momentum thinned. Not because the path was wrong, but because it demands your weight. The divine does not partner with dabbling. It responds to devotion. This is where many chosen ones stall, not from lack of calling, but from fear of permanence. Fear that if they choose, they cannot retreat. Fear that they will be seen, measured, accountable. Pivoting keeps you safe from exposure. Commitment makes you visible, and visibility is costly. Because once you commit, your life begins to testify. Your actions align, your excuses disappear, your growth accelerates. You are no longer experimenting, you are embodying. The culture will call this foolish, too narrow, too intense, too final. But intensity is not imbalance when it is aligned, and narrowing is not loss when it reveals precision. The path you are meant to walk does not ask you to abandon wisdom. It asks you to stop hiding behind motion. Movement without direction feels productive, but it leads nowhere. Stillness with commitment feels risky, but it becomes power, and soon you will feel the tension clearly. The pull to keep options open, and the deeper pull to be claimed by one. Only one of those leads forward. That visibility you felt pressing in at the end of the last section carries a consequence. Because once you stop hiding behind motion, you must decide who gets to guide you. If you listen closely, you'll notice something unsettling. The loudest voices in your life have never known your path. They only knew your potential. Advice came easily. Opinions multiplied. Metrics, feedback, comparisons all offered as substitutes for certainty. And for a while you accepted the trade. External validation feels safer than inner authority, because if others decide, you are not responsible. If the crowd approves, you are protected from doubt. But the divine blueprint cannot be crowdsourced. There is a knowing in you that does not argue. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need consensus. It resonates. You've felt it before. That quiet alignment when something fits without explanation. That internal yes that arrives before logic catches up. That unease when you succeed outwardly but feel inwardly displaced. That is your compass. It does not react to trends. It does not reward applause. It responds to coherence. The path meant for you will often look wrong to people who do not carry your assignment, not because they are malicious, but because they are oriented by a different frequency. This is where many chosen ones hesitate. They wait for confirmation from those who cannot perceive the map. They ask permission from systems that benefit from their delay. They seek validation from environments that only recognize familiar shapes. But your path was never designed to be obvious to everyone. If it were, it wouldn't be yours. Inner resonance is not excitement. It is not hype. It is not fearlessness. It is steadiness. A calm gravity that pulls you back every time you wander. A sense of rightness that survives discomfort. A clarity that remains even when outcomes are uncertain. External validation spikes and crashes. Resonance endures. This is why chasing approval leaves you hollow. Because applause fades the moment you stop performing, and then you are left alone with a life you did not choose from within. The divine path requires you to trust the witness inside you more than the noise around you. Not because you are superior, but because you are responsible. Responsibility begins when you stop outsourcing direction. You are not meant to convince everyone. You are meant to consent yourself. And the moment you do, something shifts. The confusion thins. The signals sharpen. The path stops arguing with you. It simply waits. That waiting you sensed at the end of the last section is not passive. It is deliberate. Because once you stop asking everyone else, the path begins speaking more clearly. Not louder, more often. You've noticed it even if you tried not to. The same themes resurfacing, the same invitations appearing in different forms, the same questions returning no matter how many times you move past them. This is not imagination. Synchronicity is repetition with intention. It is the language of a path that will not compete but will persist. You call them coincidences because that feels safer. Coincidence asks nothing of you. Pattern demands response. Think back. How many times have you circled the same idea, the same calling, the same pull, only through different jobs, relationships, projects, or seasons? Different faces, same essence. That is not confusion. That is precision. The divine does not shout once and disappear. It returns, again and again. Patient, exact. You were never missing the signs. You were postponing the answer. And postponement has a cost. Each time the pattern repeats, it narrows. Options reduce. Tolerance shrinks. What once felt optional begins to feel unavoidable. This is why ignoring the nudge eventually turns into restlessness, then dissatisfaction, then quiet grief. Not because life is cruel, but because alignment delayed becomes friction. The path does not punish you for hesitation. It simply removes distractions until the choice becomes clear. You may have noticed how certain alternatives stopped working, how excitement drained faster, how detours lost their color. That is not loss. That is refinement. Synchronicities increase when you are close, when the margin for wandering has expired, when the assignment needs embodiment, not contemplation. You will hear the same message through different mouths, see the same symbol in unrelated places, feel the same inner pressure no matter how busy you stay. This is not obsession, it is summoning. And here is the truth few are prepared to hear. The signs will not stop. They do not expire. They intensify. The question is not whether the path will keep calling. It will. The question is how much resistance you want to endure before you answer. Because once you do, the repetition ceases. Not because the path leaves, but because you have entered it. And the moment you step in, what was once a nudge becomes movement. What was once pressure becomes direction. The signs were never meant to guide you forever. They were meant to bring you to the threshold. You are standing there now. That threshold you recognized at the end of the last moment is not symbolic. It is functional. Because every true path demands a narrowing, and narrowing always requires release. This is where hesitation sharpens into grief. You expected resistance to look like failure, but instead it looks like letting go of things that worked. Relationships that were kind, opportunities that were respectable, identities that were comfortable, and that is why this part hurts more. The divine path rarely asks you to abandon what is wrong. It asks you to release what is good but incomplete. Good things can still be distractions, not because they are evil, but because they are sufficient enough to delay the essential. This is the pruning few speak about honestly. You begin to feel it when something that once energized you no longer fits. When success arrives but fulfillment does not. When staying feels heavier than leaving, even though leaving costs more. That tension is not confusion. It is alignment asserting itself. You are not being punished by loss. You are being protected from dilution. Every calling has a weight it can carry, and every extra attachment adds drag. This is why the path feels ruthless at this stage. Not because it lacks compassion, but because it knows what you are becoming. The chosen one does not walk unburdened. They walk unencumbered. There is a difference. Unburdened suggests ease without cost. Unencumbered suggests clarity after sacrifice. You will grieve what you release. That grief is not weakness. It is evidence that what you let go of mattered. But do not mistake mourning for misalignment. If the path you are stepping into requires you to loosen your grip, it is because your hands are meant to hold something else. This is where many turn back, not because they were wrong, but because they were not ready to be empty long enough to be filled. Letting go feels like loss only when you measure the future by the past. The path ahead cannot be compared to what you are releasing. It must be entered. The seal forms here, not when you declare the calling, but when you choose it over comfort. Once you release what is merely good, the path responds with coherence. Not immediately, but unmistakably, because now your life is no longer divided, and division was the only thing slowing you down. What you released in the last section did not vanish into nothing. It created space, and space is not emptiness. It is invitation. Because once your life is no longer divided, something subtle but undeniable begins to happen. Movement returns, not frantic, not forced, directed. This is where many misunderstand alignment. They expect comfort, they expect smoothness, they expect reward without resistance. But alignment does not remove challenge, it reorganizes it. You begin to notice that obstacles no longer feel like walls, they feel like gates. Difficult, yes, but purposeful. Every effort seems to count for something now instead of dissolving into noise. This is flow, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of momentum. You move and life responds. You act and something meets you halfway. Before effort drained you, now effort circulates. You may still be tired, but you are not depleted. You may still doubt, but you are not fragmented. There is a coherence to your days that did not exist before. This is the first sign. The second is quieter and more dangerous if misunderstood. Your sense of worth begins to detach from outcomes. You stop measuring yourself solely by applause, income, or speed. Not because those things vanish, but because they no longer define you. You feel valuable even when unseen, grounded even when uncertain, whole even when unfinished. This is not arrogance, it is sealing. When you walk your true path, identity stabilizes. You no longer need constant proof that you matter. Your life begins to feel internally justified. This is why external validation loses its grip. Not because you reject it, but because it no longer owns you. And then comes the third sign, magnetism. Without chasing, the right people begin to appear. Not crowds, witnesses, conversations deepen faster. Opportunities arrive aligned instead of distracting. Resources show up at the moment they are needed, not before, not late. This is not luck, it is resonance. When you occupy your lane fully, interference decreases. The wrong connections fall away naturally. The right ones recognize you without convincing. You are no longer performing compatibility. You are embodying it. This is why alignment feels quieter than ambition, but stronger than desire. It doesn't push, it pulls. And here is the detail that confirms everything. Even when progress is slow, it feels meaningful. Even when outcomes are delayed, you do not feel lost. Even when fear arises, it no longer controls direction. That is evidence. Alignment does not announce itself with fireworks. It reveals itself through consistency. Your days stop contradicting each other. Your actions stop competing with your values. Your inner voice stops arguing with your choices. You may not feel powerful in the way the world defines power, but you will feel positioned. And position matters more than speed. Because once you are aligned, nothing you do is wasted. Nothing you learn is accidental. Nothing you endure is random. The path begins to use everything. This is how you know. Not because life became easy, but because life became integrated. And from this point forward, the cost of leaving will always feel heavier than the cost of staying. What you recognized at the end of the last section is not just alignment, it is exposure. Because once your life becomes integrated, distractions no longer feel neutral. They feel invasive. Before, detours were harmless, interesting, even exciting. They gave you the illusion of movement without consequence. But now every deviation costs you something you can feel. This is how you know the path is real. Shiny objects still appear, new offers, new ideas, new identities calling for your attention. But they land differently now. They no longer feel expansive. They feel loud. Not because they are wrong in themselves, but because they are wrong for you. Distraction changes its flavor when you are aligned. It stops feeling like opportunity and starts feeling like interference. And interference always tests resolve. Here is the truth that emerges at this stage. Once you know your path, neutrality disappears. You are no longer choosing between good and bad. You are choosing between aligned and misaligned, between depth and diffusion, between destiny and delay. This is where self-doubt tries to re-enter, not as fear of failure, but as fear of finality. What if I lock myself in too soon? What if I outgrow this? What if I miss something better? These questions do not mean you are wrong. They mean the path is beginning to close behind you. And closure terrifies a mind trained on optionality. The fear of missing out intensifies here because the cost of wandering is now visible. You can feel what distraction steals. You lose rhythm. You lose clarity. You lose that quiet steadiness you fought to regain. And so you hesitate not because you don't know, but because you do. This is where discernment becomes a discipline, not a feeling. You can no longer afford to say yes casually. You can no longer consume endlessly without consequence. You can no longer pretend that every input is harmless. Your attention has become sacred real estate. What you feed it shapes your capacity to continue. This is why quiet becomes essential now. Not isolation, not disappearance. Quiet. Spaces where your inner compass is not drowned out by reaction. Moments where you are not responding, performing, comparing, or absorbing. Reflection is no longer optional, it is protective. The digital noise you once tolerated now fragments you faster. Endless information erodes coherence. Too many perspectives weaken conviction. You were not meant to carry the weight of constant input while walking a narrow path. And this is where many stumble. They assume alignment will sustain itself, that once chosen, the path will carry them automatically. But clarity must be guarded. Every distraction you allow teaches your nervous system to fragment again. Every detour you entertain reopens negotiation. The path does not abandon you for wandering, but it does slow, not as punishment, as feedback, because the cost of deviation must be felt while there is still time to return. Self-doubt also evolves here. It no longer asks, am I capable? It asks, am I willing to be misunderstood, willing to be less available, willing to say no without explanation, willing to let some doors close without chasing closure. This is not rigidity, it is respect for the assignment. Your path cannot be sustained by someone who treats it casually, and now something sobering emerges. You realize that distraction is not always external. Sometimes it wears your own voice. Old coping mechanisms, familiar escapes, patterns that kept you safe before alignment demanded more, scrolling to avoid silence, busyness to avoid embodiment, overthinking to delay commitment. These are not sins. They are habits that have expired. The chosen path does not coexist with numbing. It requires presence. And presence is costly because it removes excuses. When you are fully present, you feel everything. The weight, the responsibility, the consequence of your choices. This is why distraction feels tempting again. It offers relief from awareness. But relief is not freedom. Freedom is clarity sustained under pressure. This is where you learn to resist, not by force, but by priority. You don't fight every distraction. You starve it. You stop feeding what pulls you off course. You stop explaining yourself to what does not need to understand. You stop revisiting decisions that were already settled within. Your life becomes simpler, not because it has fewer demands, but because it has fewer contradictions. You begin to recognize the detours immediately. They feel urgent but empty, exciting but destabilizing, promising but misaligned. And you let them pass. Not angrily, not fearfully, firmly. Because now you know something you didn't before. Every time you choose distraction, you delay not just progress, but impact. Your path is not private. Your clarity affects others. Your consistency creates ripples. And that realization introduces a new kind of gravity. You are no longer protecting just your peace. You are protecting your purpose. This is why the narrowing intensifies here. Not to restrict you, but to prepare you. Because what lies ahead cannot be carried by someone who is still easily pulled. The world will keep offering detours. That will not stop. But your response will change. You will recognize that not everything that glitters is meant to guide you. That not every opportunity deserves engagement. That not every doubt deserves debate. Some things exist only to test whether you are serious. And now the test is no longer subtle. You can feel the difference immediately. Distraction drains, alignment steadies, detours scatter. The path consolidates, and the deeper you go, the more obvious it becomes. This is no longer about finding your way, it is about staying. What you felt at the end of the last section was not resolve alone. It was weight, because staying is not just a decision anymore, it is a vow. When the path narrows this far, it stops asking whether you believe in it. It asks whether you understand what it carries. Your journey was never meant to terminate at personal peace. Peace was only the stabilization phase, the grounding before movement with consequence. This is where the illusion finally dissolves. Your single path is not only about you, it never was. You were not drawn, filtered, exhausted, pruned, aligned, and steadied simply so your life could feel meaningful and private. You were shaped because something requires you intact. This is the part few are prepared for. Once you are aligned, your absence matters. Your delay matters. Your hesitation creates gaps that nothing else fills. Because no one else carries your configuration, your timing, your synthesis of wounds, insights, temperament, and endurance. The world does not need more options. It needs specificity. And specificity requires commitment. You begin to notice this responsibility quietly at first. In moments when someone benefits simply because you stayed. In conversations where clarity passes through you without effort. In outcomes that would not have happened had you chosen a different route. You did not plan these moments. They emerged because you were positioned. This is how the divine path reveals its scope, not through titles or platforms, but through impact that feels disproportionate to effort. And here is the sobering truth. If you step away now, something will be missing. Not replaced, not replicated, missing. That does not make you superior. It makes you accountable. Accountability is the true mark of the chosen one. Not favor, not exemption, but responsibility that cannot be delegated. You may feel the temptation here to shrink the meaning of your path, to tell yourself it is smaller, safer, less consequential. This is another defense mechanism, because consequence is intimidating. Once you accept that your path affects others, you lose the luxury of casual disengagement. Your choices matter even on days you feel ordinary. Your consistency becomes a form of service. And service is costly because it does not always reward you immediately. There will be seasons where staying feels thankless, where alignment does not equal affirmation, where obedience feels heavier than ambition ever did. This is not failure. This is maturation. The chosen path does not keep proving itself to you forever. Eventually, it asks you to carry it without reassurance. This is where identity locks in. You stop asking, "Is this really my path?" and start asking, "How well am I carrying it?" That shift changes everything. You no longer chase signs, you become one. Your presence begins to stabilize environments. Your clarity disrupts confusion without force. Your restraint speaks louder than your activity ever did. This is not performance, it is embodiment. And embodiment cannot be rushed. This is why your journey took as long as it did. Why the pruning was so severe. Why the distractions had to fall away completely. Because what comes next cannot be sustained by someone who is still negotiating with themselves. The path ahead will require endurance, not excitement, discernment, not speed, consistency, not constant novelty. And this is where your earlier suffering reframes itself. The isolation taught you self-trust. The rejection trained you to stand without applause. The exhaustion forced you to stop dispersing your energy. Nothing was wasted. Every challenge you faced was calibration. Every delay was alignment in disguise. You were being prepared to carry something that cannot be held by someone fragmented. Now the responsibility clarifies further. You are not meant to convince the world. You are meant to stand in a way that quietly gives others permission to align. Not follow you, align themselves. This is how the chosen path multiplies through resonance, not replication. People will recognize something in you they cannot name. Not charisma, not authority, integrity. A life that is no longer arguing with itself. That integrity will challenge some, expose others, comfort a few. All of that is consequence. And consequence is not something to fear. It is something to respect. Because when you walk away from your path now, you are not just abandoning yourself. You are withdrawing a frequency that others were meant to encounter. This is not pressure, it is clarity. You are free to leave, always, but you are no longer unaware of what leaving costs. The world will continue without you, yes, but it will not receive what only your alignment could release. This is why the peace you feel now carries gravity. It is not relief, it is readiness. You have reached the point where your life can no longer be lived casually, where drifting feels worse than discipline, where distraction feels disrespectful to yourself and to what you carry. And this is the final truth of the single path. It does not promise ease, it promises significance, not in scale, in precision. Your life becomes a deliberate instrument instead of a scattered signal. You will still doubt at times, still tire, still question, but you will not forget. Because once you see the path clearly, you cannot unsee it. Once you feel the weight of staying wandering loses its appeal, there are not 100 journeys calling you anymore. There is one, and it is not asking whether you are capable. It is asking whether you will continue to stand where you are now, aware, aligned, and willing to carry what comes next. The weight you feel now is not pressure, it is grounding. Chosen one, breathe here. Nothing more needs to be proven tonight. Nothing needs to be decided in haste. You are not being rushed forward, you are being settled inward. The path you stand on does not demand constant motion. It asks for presence, for steadiness, for a willingness to wake up tomorrow and remain aligned even when no one is watching. This is where many expect fireworks, but what arrives instead is quiet. a deep, unmistakable calm that does not depend on certainty, a peace that coexists with unanswered questions, a knowing that you are no longer scattered. That is not the end of the journey. That is the beginning of walking it correctly. You may still feel echoes of the old pull, the temptation to check other doors, the reflex to scan for alternatives when discomfort appears. Do not fight those impulses. Notice them. Let them pass. They are remnants of a season that taught you how to choose. They no longer get to decide for you. Remember this: you do not have to understand the entire road ahead to keep walking. You only need to recognize the ground beneath your feet. The divine path rarely reveals itself all at once. It unfolds at the pace your integrity can sustain. Some days will feel small, ordinary, almost forgettable. Those days matter, because consistency is what turns alignment into legacy. Not intensity, not visibility, just faithfulness to what you already know is yours. If doubt returns, do not panic. Doubt does not cancel calling. It tests embodiment. Ask yourself one simple question in those moments: am I still choosing alignment even here? If the answer is yes, you are still on the path. Even if progress feels slow, even if results are quiet, even if affirmation is absent, the path does not measure success the way the world does. It measures coherence. And tonight, you are coherent. Your life is no longer pulling in opposite directions. Your inner voice is no longer drowned out. Your choices, though imperfect, are no longer accidental. That is enough to rest. You were not meant to sprint endlessly. You were meant to endure wisely. So let the noise fade. Let comparison dissolve. Let urgency soften into resolve. Tomorrow you will walk again. Not because you are chasing something, but because you are carrying it. And that more than certainty, more than speed, more than applause, is what it means to walk your one divine path.